November 19, 2022, the day the son of a quintessential politician went dim. The silence of his calm personality was telling. Professor Kwesi Botchwey, Ghana's longest-serving finance minister, died at age 80.
Honestly, I think we're all still baffled and confused, lost, because it wasn't as though he was, aging, but we had his 80th birthday party in September. And I remember we had to force him to have the party, by the way, because he wasn't going to celebrate, didn't want to make a fuss. But when we had the party, he celebrated till 5 a.m. I went to bed at midnight, and I thought I'd done well. He was up till midnight, till 5 a.m., and then he had an extension of the party the following day. So this is in September. He had been having some physical challenges with one of his legs, but he was fine. The morning that he went into the hospital, I had traveled, so my daughter was staying with him. And so he made breakfast. He made breakfast for his partner, Wendy, and my daughter. He got up himself. This was something he loved to do. I think all of us have memories of him making us breakfast, chopping up the fruits, and he was very artistic. So he was very particular about how he would present the breakfast. So he did all that the morning that he went in for the surgery. So yeah, I think we're all just dazed and devastated.
For many people who were close to him during the last days, the uninvited guest of death was certainly unexpected after his 80th birthday.
So when I heard, I was a bit taken aback. I was shocked. But death, it doesn't give notice.
The news came as a shock to all of us, and God gives, God takes, and so we just pray that he has peaceful repose.
He believed in the principles and values of the revolution. He lived those principles and values, and he gave his all to make sure that the revolution succeeded.
Honorable Kojo Yanka, former member of parliament and minister in the Jerry Rawlings administration, served with him in government. He tells me Professor Kwesi Botchwey has inked his name in the economic development of Ghana, with many policies he championed still thriving in Ghana's economic structure.
During the 1979 uprising, he was, I won't say he was active in it, but he was one of those who were interested in it in terms of analyzing the potential of that movement to change the course of affairs in Ghana. But I think I saw much about him in 1981 when the second coming of Rawlings, and I became editor of the Daily Graphic, and he was fished out to become the PNDC Secretary for Finance. I must say that Kwesi also came in with the revolutionary movement, the NDM, New Democratic Movement, which gave a lot of support to Rawlings from the beginning of the June 4th uprising and also through the second coming. I knew him in that vein as radical intellectual, smart, intelligent, is somebody you could easily call a role model because he was brilliant. I found something about Kwesi during his time as PNDC Secretary for Finance. Of course, everybody knows that he chaired the whole process of economic recovery, structural adjustment in our economy. And here was a lawyer or teaching law who, because he had also studied a lot in international trade and international relations, found it quite comfortable being the chair of economic recovery for Ghana on structural adjustment. Of course, as a leftist, he must have had his own challenges dealing with the IMF and the World Bank, but Kwesi maneuvered through and took us out of some of the difficulties that we were facing. In fact, in 1985, 86, 87, 88, one could term some of the brightest moments of Ghana.
Born September 3, 1942, eventually received his secondary school education at the Presbyterian Boys Senior High School, Presec, Legon. Professor Kwesi Botchwey held an LLB from the University of Ghana, LLM from Yale Law School, and a doctorate from the University of Michigan Law School.
Taught at the premier university of Ghana for some time, then moved into politics, and then eventually also served internationally. So a man like that paid his dues in life and should be accorded the honors that he earned.
As a professor of practice in development economics at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, he taught at the University of Zambia, the University of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and the University of Ghana. While at the University of Dar es Salaam, he met Pan-Africanist, author, anti-colonialist Walter Rodney, who was murdered at age 38 for his leadership in highlighting the devastating effects of slavery and colonial imperialism in Africa and the Caribbean. Wife of Walter Rodney, Dr. Patricia Rodney, tells me the special relationship Professor Kwesi Botchwey shared with her late husband.
We met in 1972 in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, where my husband was on the faculty of the University of Dar es Salaam. My fondest memory is that he and his wife were an extremely nice couple, and we became very good friends. Kwesi was full of joy. He loved dancing, music, and just being in a community of extended family. He was a very friendly person. I mean, friendly in the sense that his face lit up when he saw people. So he was very engaging. His eyes spoke a lot. He spoke with his smile, which is, his smile and his eyes. He connected with people very easily. He was a very friendly, simple, down-to-earth person. My condolences to the entire family. I'm sure this is a very, very difficult period for them because it was so unexpected. So from my family, I send, heartfelt condolences. I think I walked in those shoes, but it's never the same for everybody.
Service to the nation began after the revolution led by the late Jerry John Rawlings.
I felt perhaps he was quite instrumental in getting that regime, PND's regime, for going to the IMF eventually to talk pragmatism, practical approaches to pulling the economy back into reality.
He served as Secretary of Finance during the era of PNDC and as Minister of Finance and Economic Planning from January 7, 1993 to 1995. He was integral in Ghana's economic recovery program.
Well, I think it was early in the 80s I really met him. And when, during the PNDC times, when I think he was one of a group of people who were assigned to manage the economy. If you would remember, PNDC didn't initially appoint like a secretary for finance. Rather, it set up a group. Kwesi Botchwey was one of them. And that was the first time I really came face to face with him. I had heard a bit about him. What stood out clearly was that he stood out, even though the reputation was that he was one of the radicals, the socialists. And he was, to me, quite a pragmatic person. You know, he perhaps talked ideology or associated with the ideologues. He was quite down to earth, and pragmatism, I thought, was what hallmarked him.
Like the former president, John Ejekum Kufuor, and Pan-Africanist scholar, Professor A.C. Sutherland Adi, many credit Professor Kwesi Botchwey for his forthright economic policies during the period of 1983 to 1992. Professor Kwesi Botchwey speaks about how he was chosen as Secretary of Finance during the PNDC era.
I was indeed a member of a search party, not a search party, a party that was convened to interview a number of prospective candidates in the very riotous days of the first, of Jerry's second coming, I think. And yes, we interviewed a number of people in great earnest, and I wasn't the only one, and we didn't find anybody suitable at the time. So I joined what was then called an economic review, a national economic review committee, with Joe Abe, Atua Hoy, Asibi Abudu, Governor Eben, Atua Hoy, a number of others. And the very first day I joined, that team itself nominated and elected me to be their chairman.
President Akufo-Addo had this to say about the late Professor Kwesi Botchwey.
Became a leading political figure in our country at a very difficult period in the history of Ghana, but carried himself with great dignity and elegance. And I think that the outpouring of grief that there is in the nation today is a good testimony to how Ghanaians valued his contribution to the growth of our nation. I had the opportunity to talk to him quite recently, and it never occurred to me that we're going to be in this position. But that is what the Almighty has for each one of us. He has a time and a place to call us one by one. Fortunately, it's Kwesi Botchwey's time.
For most Ghanaians, the simplicity and practicality of his budget presentation and detail brought a clear understanding of the state of the economy, and that translated into an almost instantaneous response.
Kwesi was somebody who pulled crowds for several reasons. You know, he was a charismatic person. He was an intelligent person. He was a leader. He was very wise. He could speak about 5 different Ghanaian languages. And I remember some of his budget days. He read the budget, and the following day he would go into various languages to say the same things he had said in his budget statement. Very rare. He was a communicator. See, Kwesi was not afraid to talk to the press. Kwesi shared his ideas openly, and he didn't only talk to the press. You'll find him in the market of Wa or in the streets of Somaya or somewhere in Makola, explaining issues in the local language. That, for me, is missing. He communicated, explained everything that was going on to the understanding of ordinary people. And I must say that I missed that one.
Haruna Idriso is leader of the minority group in parliament.
Ghana has lost one of its most influential and informed voices, an outstanding scholar of an academic icon, an outstanding public servant, and he radiated warmth and wit and was energetic and engaging in his advocacy. If there is any person who has made a phenomenal contribution to restructuring Ghana's economy from a state-dominated economy to a liberal economy which allows for private sector participation, we owe it to Dr. Kwesi Botchwey.
His family and close friends also speak of his personality, down to earth, ready to relate to the low and high and mighty.
Integrity was everything. Integrity and pragmatism too at the same time. So I think what was so wonderful about him was that he was an intellectual, but he wasn't one of those ivory tower intellectuals. He was somebody who could relate to, global leaders, and he did, and he could relate to everybody that he came into contact with. He spoke so many languages. I was just always marveling at how he could speak to, I don't want to say somebody is lower than somebody else, but he could speak, he was transversal in his reach. And he had this ability to make you feel when you were in his presence that you were the only person, you were the only person who had his full attention, and you were truly special. And he made everybody feel that, whether you were a global leader or not.
I left PNDC within 6 months, but after that, anytime the two of us had occasion to meet, he was quite civil, and I would even go further to say polite.
I remember very well about Kwesi Botchwey was his simplicity. Kwesi always dressed very simply. He rarely wore a suit. He was sociable. If you ever went to his office, he was a serious operator, but he was very free with people that he worked around, and he influenced them. If you ever entered a room where he was chairing, you could see how caught up people were in terms of they were learning something from him every moment.
Between 1993 and 1995, he continued on the path of leading Ghana's economic growth. One of the hurdles he encountered was the Komipreko demonstration in May 1995. As is his personality, his response to the agitations about the VAT policy was calm and convincing.
The point is that the VAT replaced a sales tax law that was narrower in its coverage, and which also before the 1995 budget was at 15%. So we are reviewing the situation with a view to accommodating some of the concerns, correcting some of the unintended side effects of the VAT, but we would do so in ways that don't prejudice the stability of the macroeconomic environment.
To date, VAT has proven to be a major source of internally generated funds for governments gone by and present.
He said that, look, if people don't want a VAT, a value-added tax, now tell me, is that value-added tax a bad thing? Because it has been in Ghana now for 20 years. It is the VAT that people rejected that came and re-established the Ghana Education Trust Fund, which again all governments have used for 20 years. The same VAT has also helped establish the health insurance program. And it is helping in all sectors of the economy. So VAT itself is not bad.
People had their own reason for going into the streets. But Kwesi kept his cool, he kept his focus, and he was convinced about what he was doing. He knew that those were challenging moments. He knew that Ghana was facing all the difficulties in the world, but he didn't look shaken. He was calm if you ever met him, and he kept giving you the confidence that we are on top of issues. That was Kwesi Botchwey. He didn't give any impression that he was giving up, or he was beaten, or he was like, oh, because you've said this, I'm intimidated, I'm changing my mind.
Professor Kwesi Botchwey resigned as finance minister in 1995, leaving many wondering.
When he resigned in 1995, I was in Parliament. I was Deputy Minister for Information, and we had a difficulty at that time because here was everybody, foreign press and a lot of interested people wanting to find out from the Minister of Information, has he really resigned? For what reason did he resign? And, you know, if I remember, President Rawlings was out of the country, and then all kinds of speculations. First, you know, he himself denied he had resigned because the president was not in the country, and then he came back. President came back and he officially announced his resignation from government. But then here was Kwesi. He went into academia, went back to Harvard, was all over Africa.
He went on to serve as advisor to the World Bank on the 1997 World Bank Development Report. He was, amongst others, a member and chairman of IMF's group of independent experts who conducted the first ever external evaluation of the Enhanced Structural Adjustment Facility, an advisor to the UNDP's United Nations Initiative on Africa, and an advisor to the European Center for Development Policy Management.
Searching person. That's why I say pragmatic. It was motivated by pragmatism. So I tend to think that it wasn't for anything else but that made him serve as finance, as a minister or secretary for so long. It's credited with about 13 years. People say the longest serving minister of finance. I think it was his nature of trying to get solutions that enabled him to last as long as that. The critical Ministry of Finance.
He worked at Harvard Center for International Development as Director of African Programs Research in 1998, where he lectured in managing economic reform in low-income countries at the Kennedy School at Harvard University. He was a senior research scholar, Center for Globalization and Sustainable Development, the Earth Institute, and Columbia University, USA. Member, Commonwealth Group of Eminent Persons for the facilitation of the signing of the Uruguay round of GATT negotiations. A professor of political science at the University of Ghana, Professor Ransford Jampel, was his student.
Well, Professor Kwesi Botchwey is an eminent statesman by all standards, the longest serving Minister of Finance. He retired, or he left politics and he went into academia. Personally, he taught me at the Tufts University, Boston, Massachusetts, at the Fletcher School. He was an excellent teacher. He had firm grasp over the things that he taught us. And I believe that Ghana has lost. The NDC has lost. And all of us, we've lost a mentor who was providing some mentorship for all of us who seek to influence public policy and all of us who seek to teach, students. And so it is sad.
Former Deputy Finance Minister Kweku Rekit-Hagan speaks of the role Professor Kwesi Botchwey played in Ghana's program with the IMF in 2015.
You know, I have a very, very good and a special relationship with Professor Kwesi Botchwey, which you are the first person I'm speaking with on this matter. As you know, he was our longest serving finance minister, and I had an opportunity to become a deputy minister of finance, and I used to consult him a lot. In fact, for the last 12 years, he and I live a few doors away from each other. Tumso and the difficult challenges when I was at the Ministry of Finance, I consulted him a lot on some of the things that we could do to really stabilize, Ghana's economy. And we were lucky to have him. When we were negotiating with the IMF, he chaired the IMF negotiation, not Setepe. He chaired the IMF negotiation. Most people don't know that. He was the chairman of the negotiation. Setepe was a member just like we were also members. Of course, he was the finance minister.
Professor Kwesi Botchwey had the blueprint of Ghana's economic development at his fingertips, and he espoused that clearly in most television interviews.
Stay with us. This is Agenda on TV3. My name is Matilda Asante. My guest in the studio, Uncle Kwesi, but his name is Doctor or Professor, whichever you choose to use. Kwesi Botchwey, Finance Minister of Ghana for 13 years, between 1982 and 1995. Uncle Kwesi, as he chooses to be called, Professor or Doctor Kwesi Botchwey, former finance minister. When you were a finance minister, did you have economic planning attached to it as well?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was finance and economic planning together.
So what economic planning did you do for Ghana whilst you were minister for 13 years? Looks like we've been like a yo-yo back and forth since you've been gone.
Well, I don't know about yo-yoing, but over the 13 years that I was finance minister, naturally a lot of things happened. 13 years is a very long time. Many people now, I think, have forgotten what the economy was like in 1982 when we started. I don't know if you remember any conditions that, the conditions that prevailed then.
I remember us queuing to buy kenke. That's all I remember.
Well, that's a good enough index of the enormity and the gravity of the crisis we faced.
That was.
Yes, people actually queued up to buy uncooked kenke. People stood in articulated trucks to travel long distances, and we're grateful to get, access to get even that kind of transportation.
We don't appear to have learned our lessons and are moving now so perilously close to the edge of the precipice where we were in the early 80s, with an economy saddled with debt in which we can't even pay and meet our social obligations to the poor.
So George Sepayanke is the first Chief Executive Officer of the Ghana National Gas Company Limited.
I've known Kwesi Botchwey since 1974, when I went to the law faculty, University of Ghana, Legon. He was my lecturer at Legon. At the Ministry of Finance, while I was a minister, I was the director at the Ministry of Finance. And then when I was setting up the Ghana Gas Company, Ghana National Gas Company, he was the chairman of the board of directors. So I've worked closely with him. He's a fine gentleman, and somebody who is devoted to his work. He really championed the ERP, the Economic Recovery Program. And in so doing, despite the challenges and the difficulties, he was so stolid in his approach. So stolid, so unflappable. No challenge, no difficulty really shook him. Calm, cool, unflappable is a word. And so he was able to appreciate the challenges and then find solutions to them. And that's why we were able, by the 1986, 87, up to 95, the economy stabilized.
He contested the flag bearership of the NDC ahead of the 2004 elections with John Evans Atta-Mills, who won and eventually became president after the 2008 elections.
It was very, very important to him. I mean, at different points in his career, You know, the people who really loved him were really close to him. You know, we were worried that he was giving too much of himself, and why don't you rest? And he always insisted that if there was something that he could contribute to national discourse or international discourse, he would do that, even at times when, you know, it was a very difficult thing to do. And I had one particular experience with him when he, you know, ran for the flag bearership, and I attended the Congress with him, and that was a very hard experience.
He is also remembered for his role in ascertaining the cause of the NDC's defeat in the 2016 elections. The Kwesi Botchwey report diagnosed the problems and recommendations which were considered and contributed to the appreciable showing of the NDC in the 2020 elections.
I sidestepped the position. I think that every party must forge a generational transition. You can't have the same generation of people leading and directing the party all the time.
Although mentioned as one of the persons considered as vice presidential candidate for the former president, John Dramani Mahama, he debunked said reports. But the former president, John Mahama, speaks highly of the passion and commitment of Professor Kwesi Botchwey to see Ghana develop.
He has been a member of our Council of Elders, but he's also been steering our Finance and Economic Committee. As I speak, he is the convener and chair of our Finance Committee, Economic and Finance Committee. That is working out a strategy for 2025, looking at how the economy is and projecting to 2025 and trying to put down policies that a new NDC government, if it comes into power, must start implementing immediately.
For his family and loved ones, this is how they want the world to remember him.
I'd like them to remember him as a global citizen. A global citizen, a wonderful father, and I'm sure an incredible son. A very generous person, principled, courageous. Very mischievous and playful. Yeah, he was a great man. I am privileged to have had him as a father.
May he rest in perfect peace. He's played a role. Everybody is bound to leave this earth, but at least he left a legacy that people remember.
Yeah, we can't quite believe that you're gone. But you ran a good race. You really gave it your all. And sure, we will see you again. Say hi to Mami Adra, our sister who has passed. Your sisters, grandma, and all the other angels that we have. Till we see you again.
Also praying that the good Lord will give him a good rest. By and large, I would say I saw him as a good person.
But he's bound to leave this earth. But at least he left a legacy that people remember. May he rest in peace.
He wasn't saying, I'm going to take over, I'm going to stay in, I'm a minister, so I must stay a minister, or I want to be, be a politician. But he had all these projects. It was that his life was a going concern. He hadn't said, I'm old, so. Yeah.
We miss you. Yeah, we can't quite believe that you're gone. But you ran a good race. You really gave it your all. And sure, we will see you again. Say hi to Mami Adra, our sister who has passed. Your sisters, grandma, and all the other angels that we have. Till we see you again.